recorded. Um, well, first of all, I want to introduce you to ILSA's team, the people who make this possible. Danny, if you want to put your video on so people can see you. First of all, Danny, he is the one who is organizing all these administrative tasks and communications that help us meeting today here. And then we have Ibru. Ibru, if you want to introduce yourself, please.
Hi everyone, welcome to the session today. We are very happy to have you. And I have been collaborating with CHUSA, and I am a part of Innovation in Law Studies Alliance almost a year now, and I'm very happy to be part of it. So I hope that you all enjoy today.
Okay, for those who are new here, after every session, we create an infographic and we share the video, as I already said. So that is always done by Ibru and Danny. And today, I'm very, very proud to introduce you to two people that I really admire because they are part of this change of the legal sector. First of all, let me introduce you to my dear Ibar, who nearly became Spanish. He spent some time here in Madrid a couple of months ago, so we had the chance to meet each other and have long discussions about the sector and what is happening. He's a professor in legal management and technology at the Center of Expertise Applied Artificial Intelligence and also at the LegalTech Lab in Amsterdam, Research Center for Societal Innovation, Amsterdam University of Applied Science. He's also a senior fellow at Comenius Network. He's a co-founder of LegalTech Alliance, and he is a member of the advisory board and general counsel. I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly. Ibar is really like short words and no articles, so maybe you better explain what you do. And you know, Tomer, I also have your brief CV here, but I'd rather let you present yourself. I always think it's better that the person presents and point out exactly what he wants to point out. So please, Ibar, if you want to introduce yourself and explain exactly what you do and who you are, I think it will be better. And then Tomer, after he finishes, you do the same, please.
Yeah, no problem. Well, you basically said the most important things. Ivar Timmer. I work at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, where we have a legal tech lab and where we have also a center of expertise of applied artificial intelligence, where basically all the faculties that we have at the university work together in the field of applied artificial intelligence. So what can you actually do with artificial intelligence and maybe basically technology in different sectors? So we have artificial intelligence in healthcare, we have artificial intelligence in the retail domain or in finance. And we research the use of technology and artificial intelligence in the legal domain, basically. And expert systems are a very important part of our research. So that's the topic for today. So he's sharing some experiences with you. That's basically it. So Tomer, to you.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Maria, for the invitation. So I'm a professor, assistant professor at the American University of Paris and a researcher in the University of Luxembourg, where I lead a project, publicly funded project about, in a sense, the next generation expert system. So this is still a research field. And I hope I will be able to talk about it a bit today in this discussion. I'm also working on trying to apply some of the research in order to help small businesses. I have a small sub-project which we try to apply the technology in order to help the startups and SMEs with their GDPR compliance tasks. So this is what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you both. So as you all know, this webinar makes part of the webinars we organize within the Innovation in Law Studies Alliance, a group of universities that are interested in innovation and want to do it together, want to also do global activities and learn together. So today we have chosen this topic, expert systems. Why? Because there is a lot of chatbotting, a lot of chatting about artificial intelligence, but Indeed, not so much about expert systems. I learned about them through IBAR, and I'm very grateful because suddenly I realized that there is technology ready for us, but we are not using it much. And this is expert systems, and is really powerful technology, is ready, so the technology is mature enough. And I hope that with today's webinar, you all understand what is this of expert systems. So let me explain you the dynamic of the session. Is the same as always. It will be questions. In total, we have 6 questions for the speakers. They will both answer to them. I will pose first the first one to Tomer, and then I will start with Ivar for the second one, but they can both interrupt each other, etc. Once they finish answering these questions, I think we will have a much better idea of what is this of expert systems, and then you, all the audience, we have the opportunity to pose questions, make comments, etc. I ask you please to put your videos on and your mics on, and when you finish your question, you can put it off so that there is not too much noise. But we want to see you and we want to hear you. And that's it. That's the dynamic. This will be more or less like 1 hour, maximum 1 hour and a quarter. Okay, so let's start. So guys, Tomer, Ibar, what are expert systems? Who wants to start?
Ivar, do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe, because maybe it's good
Okay.
for public. I think because I work on old school expert systems, I would say, and Tomer is working on more advanced, and I think we will. We're also looking on the horizon to do those kinds of expert systems. But if basically an expert system is a digital system that can perform tasks that an expert can perform, or parts of the task that an expert can perform. And if we talk about expert system in the legal domain, which we're doing here, of course, is you can imagine that expert system can give legal guidance, so they can help the user how to approach a certain legal situation, or how to evaluate a certain legal situation. You could also imagine that an expert, and these are actual tools that we're working on. You could also call an expert system a digital system that helps a non-legal professional that does not have legal expertise, or at least not specialized legal expertise, to help draft a complex legal document, which he otherwise would not be able to draft. So these are basically, but of course, it's a digital system, so it does this in a non-human way. It does not do this exactly as a legal expert would, but they offer possibilities to substitute in a certain way a legal expert, so that some of the tasks that a legal expert would perform are now done by the system, but of course in a completely different way than a legal expert would do that. And I think it's maybe just as another remark, which is I think important. You can use all kinds of techniques to make expert systems, and basically the systems I will be talking about mainly today are old school expert system. We basically use man-made logic-based decision trees to capture legal expertise and to help support legal tasks. We also do have projects with more advanced technology, but it's often said that this was one of the earliest forms of artificial intelligence. So basically, you just take expertise and you try to plant that in a decision tree. Which, if you do that, it's old school. It's decades-old technology, you could say. But if you do it very well, if you carefully select a process, and if that's a routine process, which can be standardized to a certain extent, and if you make that very user-friendly, you prototype it well and you test it very well, they can still, although be it old technology and old, they can be very effective, even in today's legal practice. And I think today's legal environment is a lot more fertile for this for the use of these expert systems, because the world has just been digitized a lot more than decades ago. So that's basically it, I think. Yeah, to you, Tomer.
Thanks, Eva. So this is certainly a better introduction to expert system than anything I could give. What I can maybe add on top of that is maybe to put it in scope within the artificial intelligence. Or expert systems are artificial intelligence. Nowadays, when people talk about artificial intelligence, they many times confuse it with machine learning. Expert systems predates machine learning systems, because as Eva said, they are the oldest form of AI, already in the 60s. And if you want to talk about expert system, we just maybe need to think about the competition within artificial intelligence, which is machine learning. So why machine learning? Can machine learning do the same things as expert systems? If not, what are the differences? I will not go too deeply into that because of time, but just some basic facts about it. So expert systems are based on knowledge and logic, as Eva said, and machine learning systems are based on data and statistics. And data is very different from knowledge. Data is experiences, is history, are examples. And knowledge is actually the knowledge of an expert. Now, if you take this and try to understand what are the pros and cons, because there are pros and cons for each one of them, there are very strong pros for expert systems. First of all, they're explainable, unlike machine learning systems. So many times, machine learning systems are black boxes. You get a response and you're not sure why the response is of this form. So this is a big problem, and you don't have this problem at all in expert systems. They're also transparent expert systems. You know exactly how they work. And if you think about machine learning, everybody heard about deep learning and neural networks. They're extremely complicated algorithms, and it's impossible for human to understand what's actually going on there. Although they are many times actually help a lot, we don't really understand them. Also, because machine learning are based on statistics, and they always prone to errors, because statistics are error prone. You always have some kind of confidence in what you're saying, but you might always be wrong. And in expert system, you don't have that. If the expert didn't introduce errors, then you will not have errors. And lastly, machine learning systems, because they're based on data, they're biased, because data is always biased. Examples, experiences are always biased. And again, if the expert didn't introduce bias, there's no reason the expert system will be biased. So these are the pros, but of course there are also cons. Ivar probably can explain later them much better, but the biggest one is the effort needed to create them. With machine learning, you just need to take all the data, you apply an algorithm, and of course, you need to do it in some kind of a sensible way. But at the end, you get almost for free some kind of a system which can tell you what to do in a very high accuracy. An expert system, you need an expert to sit down and find out all those loose ends and all the extreme cases. So it's much harder. And now imagine that you do all this work and suddenly the law changes or there is a new court decision. How do you update it? Where do you need to make the changes? In machine learning, you just apply the learning algorithm again. Here, it might be very difficult. And lastly, because of all this effort that is needed, expert systems normally are more focused. They try to solve specific problems, and it's harder to generalize them. So I just wanted to put it in the context of wider AI, just for us to understand maybe why people didn't talk about expert systems, because they're harder to create, but why we should talk about expert systems, because especially in the new age in Europe, with ethics, etc., they are very important, and machine learning doesn't fulfill these goals. So thanks.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, very clear explanation. So now we know the differences between expert systems and machine learning. And we know now already that expert systems are based on experts that are basically, we need to create decision trees, and that they are extremely useful to guide people on decisions or on legal issues. We know that this is not a new technology, that it is old. And as Tomer said, the reason why they might have not been so used in the last years is probably that they were expensive. But maybe now they are not so expensive, or there are less risk in certain things like data protection, etc., which made them interesting. So can you tell us how and why may expert systems be interesting to the legal domain? Can you give us like concrete examples? Can you tell us a little bit more about what a legal tree is, a decision tree is? How do you make one? Are they decision trees in laws? Ivar, I would like you to tell us a little bit more about what the Dutch government is doing as a, let's say, legislative obligation with the laws in Holland, because that is quite relevant as a policy, and that might facilitate a lot expert systems in the future. So whoever wants to start can do it.
Yeah, maybe start with the first question that you said, to put it into context a bit more. So how and why may expert systems be good for the legal domain? I think, but I think first of all say there are already a lot of systems in place, rule-based systems that support, especially within the government, administrative processes, which you could more or less say are use the same methodology, could be qualified as expert systems that support the execution of laws, of rules, of all kinds of policies, etc. And I think if you look at legal practice, and my field is legal management and technology. So I approach the legal practice from an organizational perspective. So we always look at what are legal professionals actually doing, and then of course we try to see how technology could help them. And I think if you look at legal practice and you look at what legal professionals do, well, first of all, let's say the regulatory pressure in basically all parts of legal practice is very high. Yeah? So as a result, legal professionals are always busy, and they can usually have more work than they can handle, basically. And if you then start to analyze what are they actually doing, what work do they have, you could distinguish within the tasks that they perform. There are almost always quite a few of routine tasks that they have. They might answer the same question from colleagues or citizens. They might have to ask the same question dozens times a year, for example. And then there might be slight variations, but you can see the same. So there are always routine tasks that you can distinguish within what legal professionals have to do. They, for example, draft the same type of legal document hundreds of times a year or something, or the legal department has to draft that legal document hundreds of times a year. There are always slight variations, which is exactly the first response that you get if you start talking to legal professionals is, no, I don't have any routine work. My everything that I do is bespoke, to which my reply always is, yeah, of course, but every knee operation, for example, or a back operation is different as well. But if we look at the healthcare system, for example, operations have been standardized to a high extent, and this is improved quality. And this is, so, I mean, I think if you look from that management and organizational perspective, you can see that legal professionals often perform routine tasks, and it's especially within these routine tasks that there are a lot of possibilities for expert systems to support these tasks and to basically, by doing that, lower the regulatory pressure. So you can standardize some of the routine tasks, you can automate them or partly automate them. You can sometimes transfer some of the tasks that the legal professional has to do to other professionals within the organizations. You could, for example, say in the past, the legal department drafted all the sales documents or all the procurement documents. And now, with help of these expert systems, we transfer this task to the sales departments and to the procurement departments, which makes it faster, easier, and it lowers the burden of the legal department, for example. So I think expert systems can basically just support work in the legal domain, and that making the life of legal professionals easier and improve the quality of legal services for the users of the legal service, which could be all kinds of users. Could be internal professionals from other departments, could be citizens, could be clients, could be So maybe that's the first response to your question. Maybe you can add, Tomer, to this question, so why they can be good for the legal domain. Because and then I'll come back to the question you said, Maria, about developments in Dutch practice with regards to expert systems and decision trees.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I can add the perspective from the other point of view. So Eva said why we should use expert system instead of manual systems, and it's clearly the future is using AI. AI is being used everywhere. So if you want to be competitive, if you want to be able to advance and be modern, everybody is using AI in other domains. So why not in the legal domain? Now, with this extensive use of AI, also there are coming lots of complaints about the use of AI. So the European Commission, especially in Europe, is really concerned about the use of AI. Probably partly because of the things we said before, there are lots of guidelines, of expert groups who try to understand, is AI good for society? Should we use it? And they came into conclusions that AI must satisfy various things, like, for example, accountability. Let's assume that you are an autonomous car and you kill somebody. Who is accountable? Or fairness. You have a system that helps you in the healthcare system, but it's not fair. It must be transparent because you must be able to trust it. You must be able to understand what it's doing. And one of the things is privacy. You must protect the privacy, which is very important in Europe, of the people. It's not so important in some other countries, but it's very important in Europe. So we want to use AI, but on the other hand side, we are constrained of the use of AI. And if you think about this problem, they are essential for the legal domain, right? If it's important in I don't know, in traffic control or whatever, especially accountability, fairness, transparency, and privacy are essentially important in the legal domain. So we start from the point of understanding that we want to use AI, we need to use AI. What can we do about it in the legal domain? So expert systems are clearly the right direction because they solve all these problems that we just mentioned. So how and why expert systems are good for the legal domain? They are the form of AI which actually fit the legal domain better than machine learning. But of course, machine learning is used a lot, and nobody said that it's not good. It's still by far the dominate. So if you go to conferences on AI, 95% or above of the research is about machine learning. So this is by far the dominant, but clearly there are more and more calls to regulate AI, and the result of this regulation is that expert systems are stronger and more important, and especially fitting more to the legal domain. So yes, this is just a short.
Yeah, maybe I think that's one of the most important points. If you use these, let's call it these old school man-made logic-based decision tree that we construe, basically, that we just basically draft and say, okay, we are now translating this legal rule through this methodology to the decision tree. It's explainable how we get from the rule to the decision tree. If you use machine learning, definitely has some use cases in legal practice. Absolutely, especially if you have to go to millions of documents, for example, looking for certain texts or clauses or whatever. You can definitely use machine learning because it will do it better than man. So for some certain specific tasks, these more advanced techniques are very effective and very powerful. But if you want to use technology for making decisions or supporting decisions, or one of the very important legal prerequisites is that it has to be explainable. You have to be able to understand how the system produces the decision, and expert systems, can do that. Decision trees can do that. They may be, in practice, they may be very complex because they can be very large, etc. But theoretically, you can always explain how we get to the decision, and this is the big advantage that expert systems have. And basically, we often always also say that you basically facilitate the access to the rule. So we have the rule, which is if you build an expert system to to basically translate the rule to practice, to help get decisions from the rule, or to help get explanations on the basis of that rule. So they facilitate access to the legal rule, and that's because you asked the question, Maria. You said that indeed. So of course, if you look at especially the practice of government, there are all sorts of systems that support the execution of legal rules. And in the Netherlands at the moment, that's what you were referring to, in the environmental domain. So basically everything that has to do with rules in the environmental domains, be it rules about pollution or but also a building, everything in the physical domain basically. There's a new law that basically orders governments to, so all the municipalities and the provinces in the Netherlands to, this is a phased process and it's not without problems. And, I won't go into it too deep, but basically the government is promoting the use of decision trees to facilitate the access to the environmental law system, you could say, to support citizens in applying for permits and applying for in all sorts of. So, for example, they start with very simple processes. How do you apply for a building permit, for example, for a simple building or for whatever you want to do in the environmental domain? The rules are then translated into a decision tree, and these facilitate how a citizen can apply for a building permit. So because the government is promoting that, we will definitely see in the coming years a lot of this explains for partly why there in the Netherlands at the moment there's a lot of attention for expert systems and decision trees in applying, in this case, rules in the environmental domain. And so this is, that's why there's a lot of attention for it, and that's why the use of it will definitely increase in the coming years.
In fact, if I may just add one thing,
yes.
I think Eva also is touched a very important point. So I said that you can choose if you want to use AI or not use AI, and Eva clearly said right now, we need to use AI because, and I think we can also add that legislation become more and more complicated, more highly regulated, and it's starting to be out of reach of let's say, small businesses that cannot really afford expensive legal experts to tell them what to do. If you take the data protection, for example, it's extremely complicated. So the GDPR is a very abstract piece of legislation. And then you give, and it also incorporates privacy law and cybersecurity and various things that if you go to some shop, and everybody needs to comply. If you go to some small shop and tell them, okay, are you complying with the GDPR? They have no idea what you're talking about. And they cannot have an idea. So in a sense, AI, there is a reason why AI is becoming more and more important. And because law is getting more and more complicated, more highly regulated, etc. Domains become more highly regulated, etc. So I just wanted to add this point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a long debate in the Netherlands and in every country in the world, I guess, that the regulatory pressure for organizations and everywhere is increasing and increasing and increasing. And for example, in the Netherlands, there have been projects. There are committees that are called like diminishing the regulatory pressure. So, for example, every new law has to be evaluated from the perspective of what does this contribute to regulatory pressure for organizations, etc. So basically, if you would summarize it, we've been working on trying to lower the regulatory pressure for the last 20 or 30 years, for example. But it hasn't succeeded very well. So because new rules keep popping up, we want to regulate things, etc. So you can say, oh, basically maybe we should keep trying, but the route lowering the regulatory pressure through diminishing the number of rules does not work very well. So maybe expert systems, and maybe we can use technology to facilitate the access to the rules, to support people in how to implement the rules and how to execute the rules, basically. So I think that's that's basically what's happening in the environmental domain. We should make it easier for citizens to apply, to get to know the rules, to how to apply for specific permits or whatever you need in the field of environmental law. So in that sense, expert systems, if designed well, that's an important remark to make there, because you can also make expert systems that are terribly user unfriendly. So if they're not user friendly, they actually make access to justice more difficult. So the user friendliness and attention to design is very important, because if it's not user friendly, the access to justice is worse off. But if they're user friendly, if it's really easy to navigate through the system and to get what you want, to get the result that you want, they can improve the access to justice for citizens. So that's an important aspect of the attention for expert systems, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, super. It's super interesting what you're saying. I have plenty of questions, but I'm going to jump into the next one, and then at the end I will ask you a couple of doubts that I have. So let's talk about users. When we have technology, we have to decide who is going to be the segment of users we are approaching. What kind of segments do you think that could benefit more from expert systems?
So maybe I can start again. My experience in creating expert systems is by far smaller than yours, so I can just give my much lower understanding of that. But because of the problems that we talked about before, the complexity mainly, expert systems are, and also because of the need to actually capture precisely what the law said, expert systems seems to me, but again, I hope Ivar can explain it much better, seems to me that they are much better fit to domains which are very clear. For example, you want to appeal a traffic fine, or there was a very famous case in the 80s where researchers took the British Nationality Act and created an expert system based on that, because it's very clear. If you fulfill that and that and that, then you can get nationality. So these kind of places are certainly domains where expert systems are very well seated. But again, I don't have much experience in applying them, so I will let Ivar.
No, but that's exactly, but that's very true what you say, because I can explain a bit about the projects we're doing now to maybe help to make clear that there are all kinds of user groups, basically. But we've recently received a grant from the Dutch government to research the possibilities of basically expert systems in the public domain. So we're working with 4 cities, 4 municipalities in the Netherlands and 2 provinces to research where we find use cases for expert systems, and then we are developing these expert systems and we're testing them in practice, and we analyze the process before and after to really determine whether or not they have an effect in legal quality and efficiency, etc. And these we have very different processes for which we are developing these systems, and that's also the research design, because we want to see the variation that you get and the different use cases that you can have with expert systems. But to give you an idea, for example, we have systems that support the handling of administrative appeals that citizens make, for example. So we have a system, so that's directed to citizens. Citizens that have received a decision from the Dutch government and that are wondering if this decision is correct or not, and they're wondering if should I appeal it or not. And these citizens, they don't understand the rules. Usually a citizen, in the sociology of law, we often say you have, when it comes to people in legal procedures, you have one-shotters, people that experience a legal procedure once, or repeat players. But usually every citizen is a one-shotter. You know, you run into a couple of legal procedures in your life, and you usually don't know how the legal procedure works, for example. So we are focusing on a lot of processes that are basically relatively simple from a legal perspective. For the legal profession, for the legal expert, they are very simple. But for the user, they are not so simple. So the citizen does not know how these rules work, for example. So to give some other examples, we have systems that support the handling of these administrative appeals. We were doing that with the City of Amsterdam. I think I saw one of the developers in the audience also. But we also have a system, for example, that helps within the city of Utrecht. Where we have there's all sorts of project developments going on in the city of Utrecht, of course, in the field of real estate. So the city of Utrecht has several real estate professionals that about 150 times a year have to prepare a very complex legal document, for example, that has to do with project development. This is a 50-page document, which is quite difficult we're building a tool that helps these real estate professionals that work for the city to prepare this document. So completely different user group, but also, I mean, they have to prepare a document that is for them very complex. For legal professionals, it's relatively, simple, relatively straightforward. But for people without legal expertise, it's quite difficult. And we have several other processes that we're developing systems for, and we often use the term, it's basically low-hanging fruit. It's pretty routine processes that, from a legal perspective, are not too difficult, but do generate a lot of questions from users, from the non-legal professionals. So, and it's exactly these fields where expert systems can help support these routine tasks. So, and then freeing legal professionals from, handling questions, complaints about these routine tasks, and freeing up time to handle more complex legal issues. But it's true. I think they work best in routine situations that are not too complicated. But if you look at a lot of tasks in the legal domain, you can often filter out a couple of the more routine situations, and the expert system can help doing that. And they can also say, okay, we filter out. The expert system can say they can take in, let's say, 100 questions, and can say, okay, these 30 questions, the expert system can more or less handle them itself. We can give a final judgment on these situations, and the other 70. No, you have to have expert legal advice. But this also has an advantage, because 30 questions have been handled more or less by the system, and these other 17 questions usually land on the desk of a legal professional, but in a more filtered way. There's some preparation. There's been some triage in handling the question. So even with the 70 questions that have some special circumstances that need further analysis, the system helps in clearing up the question, basically. So yeah.
Tomer, do you want to add something?
No, I think it's a very detailed explanation. Much, as I said, I don't have as much experience in applying it. And, yes.
Okay. I want to ask you a question, Ivar. You mentioned before rule-based systems. Are they different than expert systems? Because I got that doubt and I'm not sure.
No, expert systems are rule-based because they are basically they're based on if-then. Okay. Yeah? So that's why they're rule-based. They are logic-based. So sometimes you have the rule-based systems, or there's all sorts of terminology for expert system. We in our practice we usually use the term decision support systems instead of expert systems. So, but they're all rule-based. Yeah, based on rules, based on logic. Yeah.
Okay, so decision support system, expert system, rule-based are more or less the same.
Same family. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about Tomer, your project. Do you want to tell us a little bit of what you are doing? Because your let's say approach is more sophisticated than what Ibar is doing. Is there is let's say a higher doses of artificial intelligence. Can you explain us a little bit of what you want to achieve and the project that you already have going on with data protection and compliance?
Sure. So I certainly would not say that they're more sophisticated.
Well, I
technology
don't
point
know.
of view, yeah.
But what I want to say is that when we discussed why expert systems are not that popular, and we mentioned some problems like the amount of work to create, to update, and you need to focus. And then the question is, why is that? And if you can improve expert system not to have these problems, so only enjoy from the benefits of legal logic-based systems, so you don't have bias and all that. But on the other hand side, they're cheaper to build and more, in a sense, stable to changes in the law, etc. So this is what I tried to research. And when you try to think about this question, first of all, you need to understand what is involved in expert systems in order to understand why the problems are as they are. So expert systems are, in a sense, built of two components. You have the knowledge and you have the engine that is reasoning over the knowledge. And as Eva said, in old school expert systems, the engine is relatively simple. It's an if-then, if it's that, so it's a decision tree. So in order to compensate for the fact that the engine is simple, you need a lot of knowledge. And the more knowledge you have and the more interpretation of the knowledge you have by legal experts, the less flexible it is, the more narrow it is, etc. So in a sense, the problems, in my opinion at least, arise because the engine is in a sense very simple. But the knowledge is extremely sophisticated. So you need to compensate for that. Now, if you want to solve it, and this is the research that I'm trying to take, is to go to the other extreme, take the bare minimum of knowledge that you need, and create the most sophisticated engine that you need in order to get to the same result. So we can call it dynamic expert systems. You don't have an expert system, but it is being generated from the minimum amount of knowledge by a very sophisticated engine. What do we mean by that? So what is the minimum knowledge that you need in order to solve a legal problem? Is probably the legislation and the court cases, so all the legal information that you need. Hopefully, this is what you need. And then what kind of engine would you need? An engine which can interpret everything that is relating to the law. For example, exceptions. There are lots of exceptions in the law, obligations, violating obligations, contrary to duty obligations. So you have various things which, let's say, if you take the basic reasoning engine, an expert needs to interpret. Tell them, okay, this is an exception. If there is this exception in this case, you need to do that. If there is an exception in this case, you need to do that. You can see how the knowledge is growing very rapidly. And if you let the engine do all that, then you can just take the legislation which says it's an exception to Article 5, if Article 7 or whatever, and an engine can interpret that. Then the amount of knowledge that is required is much smaller. And then if you need to update it because something changes, it's much easier because you have exactly the point that you need to change. This paragraph now has an interpretation in Spain for this kind of cases. So the idea here is to play with the amount of knowledge versus the power of the engine. So I'm working on the engine mainly, and at the same time on how to be able to capture the legislation. So Eva will probably know quite a lot about these no-code systems that allow you to create expert systems. If you try to capture the legislation, it becomes a bit harder, right? Because now you don't have only if-then rules, but you actually need to capture cross-references, exceptions, and all the things that we just mentioned. And then you need an engine which can reason over that. So this is the main focus of my research. I more or less have the engine. This is the easier part. The harder part is actually to be able to capture the legislation in a precise way. So we are working on that in the research, and then we try to apply it, as I said, to a relatively small domain, data protection compliance for small businesses and startups. And the idea here is that you get exactly the same result as an old school expert system. It asks you questions in order to determine what you need to do and what is your situation, but the questions are being generated automatically. They are not being hard-coded by an expert. They're being generated from the original legislation by this, and again, this is much less sophisticated than the knowledge in the old school systems, but the engine is more sophisticated. It is being able to actually replace the reasoning of an expert, legal expert. So this is the idea here. So the result is very similar, but the system is very different.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's exactly like when we design a system, it's all handmade, you could say. We take the legal rule and we analyze it very thoroughly. We have a methodology to do that. We basically dissect the rule and label all the elements that we're using, and then we transpose these elements to a decision tree. That's basically the methodology. And we're definitely very interested in looking towards. For now, this is our way of working, and if the process that you're doing this for, and that's the interesting part. We're working in the public sector. A lot of the Netherlands has 350 municipalities, for example. So if we develop a system with a lot of effort and a lot of hard work, etc., for a rule that all these 350 municipalities have to execute, then it makes sense. Then the investment is worth it. For example, it might be hard work and to take this rule and say, I can do all this work and then make a decision tree and test this thoroughly with users, etc. That's it's a long process, but if the volume is high enough, it's worth the investment. But it's definitely interesting that, like Tomer explains. Artificial intelligence also provides techniques to maybe support this analysis of the rule. Also, we work with with some other knowledge institutes. Also, they're also working on basically tools that do a part of this analysis in an automated way already, which makes life easier for us. So they're definitely we basically have an old school way of working, but in the future, that's interesting that you will be able to use new techniques to make this long and hard process a little easier. So that's why it's very interesting to see the more from a technology perspective, more sophisticated approach that Tomer has, and the old school approach that we have. In the future, they will definitely meet, and then you will have better and stronger expert systems, which are a little bit easier to make and probably also a lot easier to maintain, which is an important part of working with expert systems in practice. Yeah.
Well, so this was our last question, in fact, that you have already more or less answered. So how do you see the future of expert systems? So you more or less said it. You see the future, you working with the technology of Tomer. So you working in the old way, but with technology that does the work that now is taking tons of time and probably sometimes not being so efficient because it's handmade, it's human made. And I probably see the future as well with a legislator that is, let's say, more conscious of the need to understand that technology is going to be there. So I think it's completely nonsense that at the moment the legislator is doing its job without taking that into consideration. And this approach of the Dutch government only for the field of environment, I think that is an amazing step that should be a model for other countries and even the European Union. How is the state of the art in that sense? Is Holland the only country, or are there more legislators? What is the European Union doing in that respect? Are they, let's say, coding law already, or do you know?
No, I think there's some attention to it, but that's not really in practice. I mean, that's not my. I mean, there are a few people in Holland who are really pioneers in this field. For example, some who are promoting the approach. Indeed, is what you say, that the legislators should actually, when making new legislation, should also, that's the ideal moment to prepare also the digital execution, because we know that in the modern world, when you make new regulations, when you make new laws, almost always some of these laws, especially if these laws that have to that have to be implemented and executed by public bodies, by the governments. You know that some of the execution will be at least partly digital. There might be still, it might be partly manual, but part of it will be digital. So actually, it should be the responsibility of the government to help other governmental organizations in implementing this in a digital way by basically already doing part of this analysis and saying, oh, these elements, so basically providing far and far more insight in how what the underlying structure of the legislation is, for example. That would be a big step forward, and. So we're not there yet, not in the Netherlands, but the awareness is growing, and it would be a good thing if the awareness in the European Union would be growing as well. I mean, Maria, I was in Madrid with you and with your help trying to find maybe people from the Spanish governmental organizations to see if they would be interested in working with us, because for example, we are working on tools that also have European rules as a basis. So if we do this, if we make a tool for, say, Utrecht or Amsterdam, it will also work for Madrid. So I think we need more collaboration on a European level, also on very different levels. But first, to get there first, I think we need more awareness, because maybe that's the remark that I haven't made yet. I mean, it's quite a struggle to transform legal practice and to transform legal departments and to transform public legal departments, because I think there's a large knowledge gap. Most legal professionals have no idea of technology, and first of all, they're very busy with the work they're doing, but there should be a lot more awareness on the role that technology plays in implementing legislation, executing legislation. So we still have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think awareness is growing, so that's a good thing. Yeah.
So just one comment. In fact, in Luxembourg, there are several European institutions, so I'm familiar a bit with the European Commission work with that. And within the publication office, there is a standardization unit, and especially for the legal documents, they actually are working in order to make them machine readable.
Yeah.
So the idea of machine readable means that the computer can understand the interpretation, in a sense, or the intended interpretation of the text. So they're struggling with it. They're using a language which it's called a Common Toso. It's just an XML language that you can actually capture the meaning of the legislation, but then also many times the legislation itself, I'm not a legal expert, but it seems to me it's very hard to capture what the legislator themselves are not sure sometimes what they meant, and they leave it abstract and very general, this open textual approach to law. So you can imagine the difficulties of trying to translate it. So another level of people, so another layer of people, not the legislators trying to do it. So I'm not familiar with legislators trying to capture the meaning, but I am familiar with other offices, like in the publication office of the European Commission, trying to capture it in a formal structure. And this is, of course, much harder.
Yeah.
And in this stage. So this is a shame, but on the other hand side, can the legislators do it? Maybe.
Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, so maybe it's impossible for them to
well, yeah, so there are some initiatives in the Netherlands where they're trying to basically work when the legislation is being prepared, to also prepare the digital execution of it, and very meticulously analyze the legal rules to say how it could, what the underlying structure is and how it can be translated to a digital system. And one of the interesting things is what you mentioned, of course, when you start this analysis, you often make clear that there are inconsistencies in this legislations, because you show, well, but how does this element relate to this element then? So basically, once you start analyzing regulations and laws from that perspective, inconsistencies come to the surface, which is actually a good thing, which you should do. So I think that's another interesting aspect of working in this way, with this methodology to come from a legal rule to a digital system, that it's very detailed, it's very meticulous, and then in the process, it shows where the inconsistencies or the things that are unclear are. So and what you need to translate it to a digital system. So if this methodology had this thorough analysis and preparing how these rules should exactly translate to an if-then rule, if you do that with legislation, I think the quality of legislation will improve. But we all know, political reality is a different it's a different field, of course. But if we should definitely head more in that direction. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's time for the audience, but if you want to give us a final remark, something that we can also use for Twitter and for our infography as a summary of your thoughts on expert systems and the legal sector, it will be fantastic.
I haven't prepared that one.
Okay, then maybe if you want to prepare it, we can tell the audience to take the microphone. That's and good. You can think about it, and then just before leaving, you say bye and you give us your final remark.
Well, I will. I'll think about it.
Yeah? Okay.
Bye sometime,
okay. So everyone, I hope that you have plenty of questions. You have the opportunity to take the microphone. Probably there are not so many, so you just jump in, and if I see that there are too many, I will moderate the presentation of the question. So you can start, whoever wants to talk, or otherwise just raise your hand and I'll. So Ebru, do you have a question? You always have questions.
Yes, actually I have a question because I think I have missed something and I am curious about it. So regarding the first question, I think there was, we mentioned that machine learning based on data, so they are biased, but expert systems, is there a bias problem there, or how it works?
So what I mentioned before regarding bias is that machine learning based systems are biased by definition because they are based on experiences. Experiences are only a finite amount of knowledge that we know about the infinite world, right? So if you take only a finite amount of knowledge or data about that, then clearly we don't capture everything. We have some bias here. So for example, if you want to help a judge make decisions, and as experience, you take the last 200 years decisions about a topic, many things changed since then, and your experiences maybe display the opinions of a certain kind of population with so it might include racism and other things, because you base it on only this finite amount of information that you have. In expert systems, and in general, in logic-based systems, of course, you can introduce bias, but then you need to introduce it. It's not inherent in the system. If of course, the expert is biased, then the system will be biased. If the expert is objective, or especially if you take the legislation as your source, then it's much harder to introduce bias because the legislation should not be biased. And if it's biased, then I wouldn't call it a bias, but it's a problem with the legislation. So this is more or less what I meant regarding bias.
Can I just ask one more thing, a small question? So, for example, when making a decision tree, if you collect a group of individuals that represents different point of views or has different experiences, and if they do this decision-making process together, then you have the chance to eliminate the bias, right? Because then you would have a lot of experts speaking on the same topic but from different perspectives, reaching to one single result. So maybe there is a lower chance of bias in the expert systems then.
So in fact, Eva probably knows much more about creating expert systems than me, so it may be to answer that.
Yeah, I think it's like Thomas said. Of course, an expert system can be biased. Basically, if you program it very badly, if you model it very badly, you will have a very bad and biased expert system. So indeed. But I was referring to the methodology that we use, and that we've copied that from other researchers, where we take the rule and we analyze the rule and we analyze the different elements that it has, and we try to make clear what all these different elements mean, so that we can translate it to the decision tree. That's the basis of our expert system. And so maybe it's not completely the answer to your question, but when you do this process and you are analyzing all these rules and you're finding all these elements, you automatically start to wonder, what does this element really mean? What does it mean? Because we have to be very specific if we want to translate it to a decision tree. And so basically, we will you notice immediately when an element is unclear, and that's exactly the point in the process where you can have a debate with professionals and with even with people who have worked in preparing the legislation, which happens sometimes, or with other experts. So how should we analyze and interpret this specific element? So in doing that, you are clear on how you analyze, how you interpret this element, and what you exactly mean by it. And that helps in the transparency of the system. So, for example, we have this rule. There's element A, B, and C. A and B are clear. It's like very, very clear elements. There's no debate possible. But C is like, what does this actually mean? So so in the process, you say, well, C is not clear. What do we mean by this rule? Could be something like cannot hinder an open norm. So we then have to specify what we, in the context of this expert system, this open norm means. And by doing that, we are basically adding transparency. We are being very clear on how we interpret the rule. When if you don't do that, then you may have a decision tree, but it's not exactly clear how you do it. So the methodology how you do that is important as well. But if you do that in a very transparent way, and if you say, oh, this element is clear, but we interpret it in this way, and we basically make a new rule. We say, oh, element C is unclear, but we interpret element C in this and this and this way. So we basically have a new rule, which is then the basis for our expert system. And then for the people who want to check if what we're doing, so the lawyers who are appealing a decision, for example, saying, show me, how have you reached this decision? So how have you interpreted element C? Well, we say, well, this, we take element A, B, and C. A and B are in the expert system this way, and element C is there, and we have interpreted it exactly in this and this way. So that's basically how you get more transparency in the system, and then maybe also can get rid of biases, because you should do that definitely in a multidisciplinary approach, and be clear and transparent on how you interpret, in this case, element C. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions? Jacob, can you take the microphone and put the camera on, please? Hi.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone from sunny Malaga. I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask, in general, Eva and Tomer, and even the audience. I'm working for an AI company based in Norway. And we have a product, and it's an AI algorithm that we apply on different products, to say, and one of those is within the legal field, and it's about what is commonly known as e-discovery in the industry. So do you have any experience there? Because I'm doing market research on competitors. I see there's a lot of talk about, as you have been discussing now, machine learning, artificial intelligence, to make models, not make models, the difference between the languages that these systems can handle. So if you have any experience, any insight there, like systems that can actually work with any language. That's my question, if you have any experience there. So if you want to read through thousands of documents in Dutch, and next time you want to do an AI-based reading through German or Spanish, So if you have any insight there, that would be appreciated.
So just one comment, e-discover is certainly a machine learning task, right? Because you need to deal with lots of data. You try to discover patterns. I don't know much about this topic, but it's more of machine learning. And machine learning is, it seems to me, I don't know of the ways of eliminating the language barrier in machine learning. This doesn't, just a comment that language doesn't exist as a barrier for expert system and logic-based systems because they're based on symbols. Another name for all this family is symbolic reasoning. So you actually have to translate it into some machine code, and then it doesn't really matter the language. But in machine learning, certainly one of the limitations, you might say, is it's certainly dependent on the language. But I personally don't know how to go around it. Machine learning is not my field. So
okay. Yeah.
No, it's not really my field either, but we do work with e-discovery software sometimes, and I think it's always the question if you want to be very, if you want to find very specific patterns, there's always the element of training the system, for example, and that's where the language part comes in. So sometimes if you want to have if you want to train it for very specific contract clauses, for example, you have to go through the training process in each separate language. And often, especially with small countries like the Netherlands, the availability of data, and probably also with Norway, if you want to do it in Norwegian, the availability of data is a problem because there's not a lot of data to train the system with. But it's it's a different problem, I would say. It's outside the domain of this expert systems topic.
Okay.
Yeah. But one comment, in fact, is that we didn't talk about it, but we implied it. I think Eva mentioned it a couple of times. Nowadays, there is a trend to combine the various AI approaches. So if previously you used AI and machine learning in order to actually answer and predict questions from scratch, now you try to combine them. You try to take the strengths of machine learning, combine them with the ones of expert systems and symbolic reasoning. So if I said, for example, you can use machine learning in order to build an expert system, then you get the transparency and the explainability, but you save lots of the work on the creation. So the point is interesting that you might be able to combine them in a way that eliminate the language barrier by applying machine learning on specific tasks and applying symbolic reasoning on other tasks somehow. Not clear how, but there are lots of research. There is lots of research being done in this direction.
Exactly. I'm not from a technical background, so it is. I'm trying to grasp as well. It's a big field, but just to give you a very short brief, what we do in the company is we apply a pre-processing of, it could be thousands of documents, say 100,000 documents with a pre-process, and that breaks down all the words into tokens. So breaking down the words by force, and then when that's been done, there's a proprietary AI algorithm that's been developed over many years that then makes a network of relation of that data, which eventually, when the process is done, that could take a few days, you can then drill down through a user interface. Say the user can actually work in a dashboard. So we're doing this in this matter. We're doing this in say the Scandinavian languages plus English, and we're now trying out in Spanish, and that should be done by next week.
So in fact, this is a great example of what you described because you actually have two phases here. First of all, trying to discover, I don't know, the grammatic or vocabulary inside the text in various languages, and this certainly depends on language. But then you translate it into some kind of a symbolic form, and then you can apply your algorithm. So if you manage to translate the same vocabulary in various languages into the same symbol, then you can apply your other language algorithm, and it will no longer be language dependent.
The other one, exactly. So when we do the AI algorithm on the first process, the pre-processing, then the words, they have then been, there's an embedded value in every word that's been embedded. So meaning that the system now knows the relation of each and every word in the bigger context. So you can actually do a contextual search in the third step, which is the user in the dashboard. So, as I said, I'm not technical, so it's a bit difficult for me to explain. I wish I had my colleague here, my professor. So they're actually doing, I know they have a collaboration with the University of Groningen, but that's within health. So it's a bit different industry. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. Any more questions, any more issues you want to raise? Hi, Bjorn. Please take the mic and the camera.
Yes, hello. First of all, thank you
Hi.
very much for the questions. So this is Bjorn from Austria, actually. So I have a question, or two parts of a question about efficiency or the right or proper technology for building expert systems. So I assume that decision trees are a very efficient way of taking decisions, right? So I guess if you make a more sophisticated engine, then well, I guess the computation becomes more expensive or more costly. So my question is this going to be a barrier, or is that the technology these days developed enough so that you can do these things efficiently? And well, in general, maybe what kind of technology would be suitable for implementing these kinds of systems?
So this is a very good question. So you talked about the reasoning engine. If you make it more sophisticated, you very quickly might get out of computability boundaries in a sense. So the point here is, and in fact, one of the reasons, in my opinion, that this approach, so what the approach I described is not something new. So trying to come up with more sophisticated reasoning engine is also something very old. Trying to find logics and reasoning systems that can actually replicate or simulate the reasoning of a legal expert. But it didn't catch very much. Unlike expert systems, which actually exist and being used, you don't see systems based on more sophisticated engine, and it's mainly because of what Bjorn just said. The solutions are very complicated. So my approach is to take, I'm coming from the field of symbolic reasoning, so I'm not coming at all from the legal reasoning part. And many of the results there are being generated by the logicians who come up with the right logic, and they try to find out the right tool to reason over that. If you think about it from the reasoning part, you come up with the best tools and try to find out what kind of things you can actually do with that. Then you might not be able to cover as many problems that are described by the logicians, but you will have an efficient tool. So this is how I approach the problem. I don't want to go into technical details, first order logic, higher order logic, model logic, etc. But certainly if you start with the most efficient tools right now, and there are various there are ones that are used everywhere, like logic programming, first order logic reasoners, etc. There are known tools. They deal with SAT solvers. If you manage to harness these tools in order to solve your legal problems, then I don't think you will have this computational boundary. But on the other hand, this needs to be tested. So my approach was not tested on full legislation with very complicated problems yet. So I cannot answer it in a frank way, but I believe it might work. I hope.
No, maybe, and the project we're working on are what I described as low-hanging fruit. So basically, it's relatively simple expert systems that we're working on, and they can be handled perfectly by the low-code and no-code software that there's out there on the market. And we have worked with different organizations, and all these different organizations have, well, different software that they use. There are a lot of software providers that have tools for this, like. Brighter is a large provider, but you also have tools that come from big legal publishers such as Thomson Reuters, and we work with a lot with a Dutch provider which is called Berkeley Bridge. So there are many software providers that have low-code and no-code software that can do more than enough if you want to make relatively, well, I would say you can go to pretty complex expert systems. But the things we're working on are relatively simple and can be executed perfectly with low-code and no-code software. So.
For those who are not acquainted to this vocabulary, maybe it's interesting to explain that low-code and no-code platforms are those who allow you to, let's say, have an account, and then you can program without knowing anything about programming. So they are, let's say, there is an automatic programmer there, and they speak your language as a lawyer. So you just join the platform, and then you can, they will propose you things, and they guide you through the process, and they let you build fantastic tools. And Ibar mentioned some of them, like Writer or Berkeley Bridge, and there are others. There is also this one, the one which is free code, open source, is Documate, the American one. I can't remember.
Doc Assembly, I think it's called. Doc
Assembly. Okay, Doc Assembly. So there, you can already build expert systems without much investment. And then there are tools which are a little bit more expensive, but let's say they will give you more service and more support.
Yeah, I often compare it to, say, for example, something like Photoshop. For example, if you can do a lot of things with Photoshop, and if you want to be a super user of Photoshop, it is quite a, it will take some time. It's quite difficult to learn to Photoshop. Maybe the first steps are easy, but if you want to use all the functions, but it's not programming. And basically, that's also basically where you want to work with these sort of low code, no code software. You can do a lot of things with them, but you don't really have to program. So, no.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay.
So, any more questions?
No, so then I think it's time for the quote that we have to give you, yeah?
Yes. Do you have
which
time
I've been
to think
secretly
about
working on in the meantime. No. I think it's so the quote would be something like that legal professionals should wake up to the possibilities that technology has to offer, and expert systems can be an important part of improving legal quality, improving legal practice. So that's it. Yeah.
Tomer.
I adopt fully this quote.
That's not allowed.
I forgot to think about it.
Very good.
I can send you maybe later. I will have to think about it.
Okay, you can send it to us later, guys. No problem. You gave us already a lot of information. I think that now we understand much more about expert systems. We know now that there is not only machine learning in the world of AI for the legal sector, but also this system based on expertise, on our expertise. But we need the legislators to work harder and better in order to have this expert system really being deployed in an, let's say, easier and more perfect way. In the meantime, thank you, Ibar, and thank you, Tomer, for investing your time and effort in trying to, let's say, automatize and help legal professionals to take better and more consistent and sure decisions, because what in my case I think is clear is that despite the fact that many legal professionals try to insist in the idea that they are unique and their knowledge cannot be let's say automatized or digitalized, I think that it is clear that there are plenty of tasks that are completely stupid, that are of giving no value to society, and we are paying taxes for them. And I think our society is now in need of a, let's say, perfect investment, because we are becoming old in Europe. We need more money for our, let's say, retirement, health, etc. And I think it's completely nonsense to keep on investing money on silly tasks. Besides, I think that many civil servants will be much happier doing other kind of work, and will always smile when being asked intelligent things and not having to do these stupid things. Besides, I would like to say that this is not only for the public sector, although you, Ibarra, are working mainly in that one. It is also for the private one. I think that law firms could really take profit of these systems, as well as, for instance, universities. Tomer is working already with his university, trying to help the data protection officer to do her job better. And I think that also private sector should be looking at this kind of technology, which is there, which is available. There is the technology, the hardware part, but there is also the knowledge there, because we know that it's been done with success. So we hope that the Madrid region, the Town Hall of Madrid, hear this webinar. We will send in the video, and we hope to, that you both, Tomer and Ibar, work together, because I think you are completely compatible, and maybe you can come back in 1 year and tell us that you are doing an amazing project together.
Good idea.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria and Ebru and other people.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you for being there. And as I said, this video will be posted soon. Next webinar of ILSA is on March the 9th at 5 o'clock as well, European time, or set time, Central Europe time. And the next topic is also super interesting, so I invite you to come. We're going to talk about how technology is helping conflict resolution. And we're going to have really 3 interesting business cases. So people are using blockchain to solve conflicts. How do they use blockchain to solve conflicts? And some people are using alternative dispute resolution platforms as well to solve conflicts with very special, let's say, new legal professions, people who are helping to solve these conflicts. So we will talk about all this. I invite all you to join us on March the 9th. Thank you very, very much for being with us.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.